We're talking today with Robert Barrowcliff of Castle Rock, Washington, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, begin with some basics on yourself, like where and when were you born?
I was born in 1947 in Silverton, Oregon.
Okay, and did you grow up there? Did you move around?
I grew up in Staten, Oregon.
Okay.
Went through all the schools, grade schools.
Yeah. What was your family doing for a living when you were a kid?
My dad was a Union Oil driver for delivering gasoline and oil throughout the Santiam Valley.
Okay, and where did you go to high school?
Where did
Where,
I?
yeah.
Staten.
Okay.
Staten High.
All right, and what part of the state is that in?
It's just east of Salem, about 18 miles.
Okay, so kind of western Oregon.
Yeah, it's up there. It's what's called the Santiam Valley, which is famous for logging.
Okay, and what year did you finish high school?
1965.
Okay, and what did you do after you got out of high school?
I went to Oregon State for a couple of terms and decided that wasn't for me, so I ended up going to Chemeketa College.
Okay.
And I graduated as electrical engineering.
Okay, so that was more of a technical school or trade school
It
kind of
was
thing?
a 2-year technical school.
Okay, now, so did you finish that in 67? Or 60, maybe 8?
In 68.
68, yeah, because you had time to Oregon State first.
68.
Okay, and while you're in college, are you kind of aware that Vietnam is going on and that Uncle Sam might want you?
No, I was, we were working construction in the summertime, and when I was going to college, I was working full-time, so I didn't have much time, but the year that I failed to register back for college, I was immediately got my draft notice.
All right, so Uncle Sam was keeping track of you.
So they knew that I wasn't going to be in school.
All right, now, so when was that then? You had to.
That was in the summer of '68.
Okay, and when did you report for duty then?
And I reported for duty, I think, Election Day, 1968, which is November 2nd or 3rd.
Okay. Now, where do you go for basic training?
I went up to Fort Lewis, and they gave me an option. And being in November, Fort Lewis was not that great of weather, and I was used to that. I could stay at Fort Lewis, or I could go to Fort Polk, Alabama. And I chose Fort Polk.
Okay.
So they flew me down to Alabama, and that's where I did my basic training.
All right. And can you describe a little bit what that was like? I mean, when you arrive at Fort Polk, what kind of reception do you get there?
The reception was fine. It was just the real strict military life. You have the drill sergeants ordering you around, but I didn't have too much problems. In there someplace we were tested for aptitude, and I knew that I was going to get drafted, so prior to being drafted, I was taking some flight lessons.
Okay.
I learned how to fly. I think it must have been the early part of '68.
Okay. Now, does just fly like as the little propeller airplane kind
Fixed
of?
wing.
Fixed wing plane, yeah.
Fixed wing.
Okay.
So I had some aptitude towards their tests. And I apparently came out of that test all right, because they told me that I didn't have to go to AIT, that I went from there once through the basic flight school.
Okay. Now but you did go through the basic training at Fort Polk first, the one that everybody gets.
That
Okay.
was I think that was 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Basic
Okay.
training.
And so, what are you spending your time doing during that 8 weeks?
Exercise and running. That was it. It was just a basic training.
Okay.
We did some escape and evasion maneuvers and some crawling under concertina wire through the dirt.
All right. Now, you said, I guess, with the kind of work you were doing, you were probably in pretty good shape at that point?
Yes, I was in pretty good shape.
And you had a reasonable idea what you might be getting into. Were there other guys that you were training with who were having more trouble?
Well, I can remember one day we had to run a mile. But this was without packs, it was with combat boots and fatigues and whatnot. and we were supposed to do it in 6 minutes. I think I did mine in 6 minutes and 10 or 15 seconds, and I was the second person. That's where I learned a lifelong lesson. Don't come in first, and don't come in last. You want to be in the middle somewhere, because the drill sergeant made a point. Everybody was also slow, so he said to the first guy, show him how to do it. And he had to run another mile.
All right. Were there guys who had trouble with the discipline part?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So basically they just went along with it and
Yeah, we
did the
didn't.
best they could.
Nobody
Okay.
on it.
Yeah. Well, I asked that because sometimes people talk about misfits or people who made all kinds of trouble or didn't know their left foot from their right. But if you didn't see it, you didn't see it.
Well, I don't remember it.
Yeah.
It didn't stick in my mind as being
Sure.
important at the time.
Okay. So you do this for 8 weeks. And at what point do you find out what your options are?
I think that we made application sometime during that basic training. We took aptitude tests of
Right.
some kind, written tests. And sometime towards the end, I'm sure that I was told that was going to flight school in
Okay.
Mineral Wells, Texas.
All right. So is that your next stop now?
Yeah, that was a helicopter flight school. It wasn't fixed wing. How that got determined, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, the Army needed a lot of helicopter pilots
Yeah.
and not as many fixed wing, most likely.
Right.
Because for fixed wing for the Army, would that just be observation planes or
Well, they had
or transports maybe? I don't know.
they had some corporate jets to fly, but I think that the attitude was that if you knew how to fly a fixed wing, we want to teach you how to fly. We don't want you to bring your knowledge in. So if I knew a little bit about fixed wing, they put you in rotary wing.
Okay.
Those that knew rotary wing, they put in fixed wing.
Okay, good for the Army then. All right, so it's rotary wing for you. Okay, where in Texas is Mineral Wells? Is it near
West of Fort Worth, maybe 50, 75 miles.
Okay, all right. And what does the training program actually consist of?
We started off, the helicopter was a TH-55, which is a two-person trainer. And that's what we went to. We had an instructor that just took us out and we started to learn how to fly.
Did they give you any classroom stuff first? Or
Oh yeah, we had lots of classroom. We had lots of classroom. Every day we had classroom, and I'm gonna guess that each day we probably had 1 hour of flight time. And at the end of a week or so, that was an 8-hour or an 8-week course.
Okay.
So,
So you start with, do you stay with the trainer or do they move you up?
no, we stayed with the trainer
Okay.
at that place. Then we went to, at some point, after we got out of the basic helicopter, the TH-55, we started flying Hueys. And again, we were with a trainer, and each instructor had 2 or 3 students. And you would fly in the Huey, all the students would be in the helicopter, a couple in the back seat watching, and then we'd just rotate.
Okay. Now, describe for an outside audience the difference between the trainer and the Huey.
The trainer, the TH-55, looks like a little mosquito, little tail boom, a little bubble up front, and just enough room for 2 people.
Right.
And the UH-1, there's several models. There's a pilot and a co-pilot, and in the back seat you could put maybe 5 people in the back seat. So they were made, that was the primary helicopter in Vietnam.
Right.
Was the UH-1.
Okay. And was it more powerful and more?
Yeah, because you could carry a lot more.
Now, was it harder to fly than the trainer, or did it flow pretty naturally from one to the next?
It flows pretty naturally. There's a lot more to it. They're turbine engines as opposed to a reciprocating engine. You learn hand-eye coordination in basic training for a helicopter.
Okay. All right. Now, as you were going through the stages with these different kinds of helicopters, were there other people in the class dropping out, or were you all staying with the program as
I
far
think
as
we
you
were
know?
all staying with the program.
Okay. All right. And when you're learning to fly the Huey, are they beginning to teach you the kinds of things you might actually do with it if you were in the field, or was this?
Yes.
Okay.
We had simulated landings, and that we would go out and land in formation, and we never did carry troops or anything like that, but we did a lot of LZ landings.
Right. Okay. And did you work on things like sort of hovering so you could lower things?
Yeah.
Or, yeah. All right.
A lot of that. Yeah, you do a lot of hovering. That's what some of the things the basic helicopter does. One of the hardest things you learn is for it to get off the ground and keep the direction you want to be in.
Right.
It wants to spin around the rotor. So that's the control problem.
Okay. And so then with the Huey, how long do you think you spent working with that?
Boy, I think, well, the TH-55, when I first learned to fly, I think I flew it like 6 hours. After 6 hours, I was soloed.
Yep.
And that was an exciting experience. Nobody had any problems. Everybody soloed just fine. We never had any crashes.
Good.
Nobody ever bent anything. In the Huey, you don't solo in a Huey. There's always two people. That's different from the TH-55. Sometimes you're the only one in it.
Right.
I can't remember how many hours I've spent in the Huey. 15 or 20 maybe.
Okay. And then from there, do they graduate you to something else?
From there, out of their class, I can't tell you how many were in our class. From there, they made a selection that there was, I think, 3 of us that went on to Chinook School.
Okay. Now again, describe for the outside audience what a Chinook is.
A Chinook is a tandem rotor, 2 rotors, 2 engines, and it's a troop or cargo carrying helicopter. We could carry 30,000 pounds. I put big trucks inside the Chinook. I've carried water buffalo. I've carried sling loads, a lot of sling loads in the military. What you end up doing is carrying ammo or cannons or.
So they're hanging below the helicopter
They're hanging
itself
below.
rather than inside it, and they're slung on. Yeah. Okay.
You can do both. You can carry. Sometimes the loads were internal loads. We also had what we call bus runs, which is just like it says. You carry people from one town to another town just because the military is moving around or people going on R&R. So it was just a bus stop.
Okay. Now, was that noticeably hard? Flying a Chinook noticeably harder than flying a Huey?
There's more to it because the Huey, you almost always had internal loads. So you either didn't put more inside. Now, the Huey's capable of external loads, but very rarely do they do that. It's mainly a troop movement device.
Right.
The Chinook is made for cargo.
Okay. So the big thing with the Chinook is not so much that you've got 2 engines and rotors to deal with as it is that the load may be down there someplace.
The load
rather
swinging
than
around, and the load dictates how fast you can go, your elevation, and et cetera. So
Okay.
you don't know how much that load weighs until you pick it up, how much power it's going to take. So you got to calculate if you're going to a higher elevation and you've got all the power in it just to get it off the ground here. You're going to a higher elevation. You're not going to have enough power to get it there unless you burn off fuel. So you have to make some judgments.
Okay. So just you're adding to the level of calculation you've
Yes.
got to make and just do automatically when you're flying.
Right.
Okay. Now, were you doing all of this at Mineral Wells, or did they move you from base to base?
No, we that is in Fort Rucker, Alabama, the
Okay.
Chinook training.
All right.
That was I think that was 8 weeks also.
Okay. Do you have a sense of roughly when you finished at Fort Rucker?
probably 30 days before I went to Vietnam.
Okay. Well, when did you go to Vietnam?
I was in Vietnam in, I think, January of 1970.
Yeah, so the year of Ripcord, basically.
Yeah.
Because it takes all. You had a whole series of training stages, so you spent basically most of 1969 then.
Most of it, much of a year.
Pretty much the whole year, kind of in training in one place or another as you went around.
Yes.
Okay. Now, while you were in these different helicopter training schools, I mean, what was daily life like?
Once we got to Chinook School, we were enlisted until we went through basic flight training, and then they made us E5s automatically.
Mm-hmm.
And once we got through that school, finished the Hueys, I think we were officers, warrant officers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, explain what a warrant officer is.
Warrant officer is a non-commissioned officer. In my opinion, is the ideal officer because you're not attached to a cannon or an infantry troop. You're a pilot in that sense, and that's your responsibility. You didn't have responsibility for other groups of troops.
You're not, in this case, you're not commanding people, but you
Correct.
just have a particular job. On the other hand, you're at a level where you don't have to do a lot of the routine duties an enlisted man would do.
Yes.
Okay. All right. In general, the military uses these for people with specialized skills or talents, I guess. And helicopter pilot is one of those.
If you're a commissioned officer, you had to be either infantry or artillery or some other such thing. So you had to go through a whole schooling for that, where the warrant officers did not. We were flight.
Okay. And so you didn't have to do any kind of specialized, how to be a warrant officer school?
No.
You just did your specialized training and you did that instead?
Correct. No,
Okay.
there was no.
All right. Now, will they let you go into an officers club?
Yes.
Okay. So you
Yeah,
get that.
we were officers. We had all the privileges of the officers. We were the lowest rank of all of the officers, but
But it still counted.
you know, we no problem.
Okay. Now, before you go to Vietnam, did they give you any kind of preparation for it?
No.
Okay. So there's nobody as you go along, there's nobody telling you this is what it's like in Vietnam or here's what to expect.
Well, all the training was when you flew into landing zones. The training was to simulate that kind of a landing that you would do in Vietnam.
But they're not teaching you anything about the country or the culture
No.
or anything else like that? Okay.
No.
All right. So now we kind of you kind of probably finished a lot of the training toward the end of '69. I mean, did you get to go home for Christmas or were you still?
Yeah, we had 30 days after the Chinook training at home, and then I left.
Okay. And did you think or worry at all about the prospect of going to Vietnam, or did you just take it in stride?
Well, I was married when we were in Mineral Wells doing basic, and I couldn't live with my wife there. But once we moved to Alabama, Fort Rucker, I could live off base with my wife. So you have those apprehensions. So it was hard to leave.
Right.
My wife and I, we drove to Boise, and I got on a plane and waved goodbye and didn't know if I was coming back or not.
All right. So what was your start off point in the States? Where did you leave from?
We flew out of Boise and flew into San Francisco or LA, I forget which.
San Francisco was the most common place to send people out of. But they'd be like a big depot that you report to and then they sign you?
No, I don't recall. It just probably had a flight number.
Okay.
So we just, as civilians, just essentially got on and ended up in Vietnam.
Okay. So you were not on a flight that was all military personnel? Because they chartered a lot of civilian jets to send people over, so you could be on a regular airline with stewardesses and stuff.
Well, it may have been we were all headed for, but we weren't in uniform.
Okay. Because it could actually have been a civilian plane at that point? I don't know.
Yeah, it must have been, because it must have been a civilian chartered plane we were all dressed in civilian clothes and just dropped off in.
Did you go to Saigon or
Saigon.
somewhere else? Okay. So, Tan Son Nhut, the big airport there?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Once you land in Vietnam, what's your first impression of Vietnam?
Well, when you're landing, you're looking out and looking for gunfire or people wandering around with guns, and it was calmer than I expected. There really wasn't anything happening.
Okay. Did you land during the day or at night?
I think we landed during the day.
Okay. So when you get off the plane, what happens?
When I get off the plane, we got on another plane, and I knew that we had to go to Hue. We were assigned somewhere along the way. I knew that I had to fly into Hue.
Okay. And what, did you have orders for a particular unit at that point? Or just go to?
Yeah, I must have, yes.
Okay. All right. So when you go up to Hue, did you go into Camp Eagle, which is sort of Phu Bai, or?
We were picked up at the airport, I'm sure, at Phu Bai,
Okay.
by our company executive officer.
Okay.
I remember him very well.
All right. And then A Company, what battalion was it that you were in?
A Company 159th Assault Support Helicopter Company.
Right. Okay. And so now you are with the, and what was the function of that unit?
That unit, we had, I'm going to guess, a dozen Chinooks. That's all we had for aircraft. And that's what the whole company was either the support personnel, the crew.
Okay.
You know, there were some cooks and some supply people, but predominantly it was to support the Chinooks.
Right. About how many people do you suppose would be on the ground?
In that company?
Yeah. As opposed to ones who fly.
Maybe 150. You know, we had trucks. We had some trucks. So we had a motor pool division, and we had a supply division. We had a mess hall, and
Okay.
all that ancillary
Yeah.
stuff.
Now, what was the standard crew for a Chinook?
5.
What were they?
Pilot, co-pilot, crew chief, and usually 2 door gunners.
Okay. So a Chinook, while it's a transport, still has door gunners on it.
Yes.
Okay. You associate those with the Hueys, but they have them too. Okay. Now, what base were you operating out of?
We had our own base. A Company pachyderms had their own flight line.
Okay. So was it on a larger base? Were you at Phu Bai, or you?
No, we were at Phu Bai, and we were a standalone Phu Bai. Each of the companies, there was 3 Chinook companies.
Okay. So you had your own area with its own places, helipads or whatever, and everything. But, so within this larger base, this is your chunk of it.
No, we
Or
wasn't a larger base.
Were you outside the wire of the main base at Phu Bai?
We had our own
perimeter.
We had our own perimeter.
Okay.
Now, I suppose that the Phu Bai Air Base was probably part of that perimeter,
Okay.
because we could take a vehicle and go over to the air base, but we were separate from Camp Eagle.
Right. Okay. All right. But not sort of isolated so that you could be surrounded by angry NVA.
Correct.
Okay. All right. But basically, this really was your world for the time that you were there.
We had our own perimeter that we were exposed, and we maintained that perimeter.
Okay. Now, as a pilot, did you have to do bunker duty, or were you exempt from that?
No, you still had to do. You had to monitor. Everybody had the responsibility to monitor for a night or so, or you had to do patrols where you walked through all of the enlisted people and make sure there wasn't anything strange going on. But for the most part, that was very, very little.
All right. Now, were you attached to a specific larger unit, or would you serve anybody in all of ICOR? I mean, so were you attached to the 101st Airborne, or did you work with anybody?
No, when we got our orders, it was just an order to go fly from here to there, pick up something here and take it over there. So it had no reference to who it was.
Okay.
Most of I Corps was the 101st, but I've flown in stuff to the Canadians, and their Marines. We did some work for the Marines and the Navy.
Yeah. Did you ever do things for the South Vietnamese?
Oh yeah, I'm sure we did.
Okay.
And when you're in the helicopter dropping a load, you don't always know who's underneath it. You're given a location, and that's where you drop it. Somebody throws smoke out, that's where it goes, whatever it is you're carrying.
Okay. Now you're coming in, now, do you start piling right away, or do you have an orientation period first? What happens once you join the unit?
You have an orientation period where you fly with somebody that's been there a while. You fly as co-pilot, and you do that until, I don't think there's a set time. I think you do it enough until somebody gives you the okay, and the CEO says, put him on his own. And I don't remember how long that was.
Okay.
Wasn't too long, maybe a few weeks.
Okay. So you're arriving there early in 1970. Were you busy right away? Was there a lot of flights to make?
Well, the first thing that I remember was when we got to the air base, the first thing that we had to do was bury Bangalore Torpedoes.
Okay.
So that was kind of unusual. And it's no longer has anything to do with flight. You're out there messing around with a bunch of explosives, making graphs of where this stuff is buried. So
are you just burying them for storage, or do you?
No, we're burying them for protection.
Okay.
This is inside the wire, but it's places that nobody was supposed to be. No walking, but if the enemy came through the wire, which was not uncommon, theoretically somebody could set off these.
Okay, but so you would detonate them. They wouldn't just step on them and set them off. They're not a landmine exactly in the conventional sense, but still, I guess, an IED in a way.
Yeah, they're a IED, and where those wires went and who had responsibility for them, I don't know. We were new in country, and we were out there burying these things, and the wires went off to somewhere.
Okay.
If this was the executive officer that was in charge of all of this, he's the one that picked us up. That's probably why I remember him as much as anything.
All right. Now, when you start flying, did the mission seem pretty routine when you began? Were you getting shot at or not?
No, we weren't shot at. Chinooks are fairly valuable, for they don't put them in too bad of spots. So mainly we were flying up and down the Highway 1, I guess it was, corridor, supplying major bases with one thing or another. Now, we also would fly out to the fire support bases, because we were the ones that supplied, and the only ones that could supply big cargoes of ammo. We carried the 105 howitzers out.
So the artillery pieces, the artillery ammunition, and large supplies of
Water,
food, water,
and I've even carried money, complexes of money out, or MPC, I think they called it.
right.
I know that because the door came open one time.
So you had a bunch of this funny money just flying out.
The rotor wash, it was everywhere.
Wow. Okay. All right. So you start doing this. Now, this is in the early months of 1970, kind of January, February, March, in there. Now, did you have to deal with weather issues? Were there places you couldn't fly, or?
Well, we put in Firebase Ripcord. We were the first ones to actually put troops and cannons on Firebase Ripcord, and that was in the early part of the year. I can't tell you whether I was the pilot or the co-pilot at that time, but I know we put it in, and it wasn't in there for very long, and then we had to take it back out, because we couldn't resupply it because of the weather. The weather was a problem, and I assumed that they thought it was too vulnerable.
Yeah, because there were 3 attempts to establish a fire base on that particular hilltop, and the first effort was, I think, the 12th of March or something like that, and they land and they go off pretty much in the same day, and they try it again April 1st, and the men walk off and leave, and it's not until about 10 days or so later that they actually finally establish it. Now, were you flying all of those, or did you?
No,
You think you flew the first one, maybe?
no,
March?
I don't know which one I would flew. I think that we were carrying the cannons in.
Yep.
So I don't know which one of those there were, which one of those.
Yeah. So it could either have been the March one, or it could have been April 1st. But you remember going out there to this place and having to go in and pick the stuff back up
Put it
again.
in. We'd carry a cannon, a 105, with another sling load of ammo underneath it. So when you set it down, you set the ammo down, then move over and set the cannon down.
All right. And so you did that for Ripcord. Now, were you doing that to establish other fire bases?
Yeah,
too?
that's mainly what we did.
Okay.
All up and down the mountains there. There weren't any fire bases out in the valley. They were all in the mountains, and there was a dozen or more in I-Corps
All right.
that we supplied.
And were there particular tricks or problems that you had to be aware of or watch out for if you're up in the mountains and so forth?
Yeah, you're very cognizant of the wind, and of course the clouds and the weather. You know, sometimes we were we were removing people that had been shot, medevacs.
Mm-hmm.
If we were the closest to a base, Hueys are usually used as medevac, but if we were the closest ones or the only ones that got in because the clouds lifted and we carried people out.
Okay. So I guess at what point, when you're in Vietnam, do you really kind of get the sense that you're in the middle of a war? I mean, was that as soon as you got to the base, or was it when you started?
Well, probably in one of my orientation flights, I was with, I can't tell you who I was with. We were flying at very high altitude, like 5,000 or 6,000 feet, which rarely did we do.
Mm-hmm.
And across the headphones came a beep, and my pilot at that time says, if you hear two beeps, you'll never hear the third beep because that's a incoming missile or something. That got my attention. I never did hear the second beep, but we were up flying probably over the DMZ at that time, but at a high altitude. So that probably is what made me think,
Okay.
this is real.
All right, so Ripcord gets established as a fire base in April 1970, and there's other bases in the area operating around. Was there a point at which, I guess, and eventually Ripcord would become under siege sort of in July and be bombarded a lot. Before that period, before July of 1970, were there other difficult situations that you found yourself in? Other kinds of things, can you talk about some of that?
There was a fire base southwest of Ripcord, much lower elevation, probably halfway to the valley. I can't remember the name of it, but it was under siege. A lot of mortars were going into that, and they needed water bad. And I don't know whether I volunteered or that was just the assignment to take a billet of water in. And we knew that if you're going to spend any time on that hovering, you're going to take a mortar round. So we had to come in and drop the billet of water as fast as we could safely and get out of there before the motor started. And we dropped it. I later heard that it rolled off the mountain, but they still got some of the water. We never saw any mortar fire.
Okay.
So we were out of there before anything happened.
Now you say a billet of water. Is this just like a giant plastic container, bag, or
Big black tube full of water. I'm guessing 500-600 gallons.
Okay. And was it got a flexible, like it would be inner tube material kind of thing, or something like that? Okay.
You could have dropped it. I mean, I was the pilot, and my command to the crew chief was get it on the ground and let's get out of here.
Mhm.
So everybody knew that we were in a hurry, and we probably dropped it a few feet off the ground instead of setting it on the ground.
Right.
And it bounced and rolled, or I didn't actually see what happened to it. We were getting out of there.
All right. And before the Ripcord in July, were your helicopters ever hit with enemy fire?
I'm not sure that any of the pachyderms were hit.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other companies were destroyed.
Yeah.
There was one off of that took a cannon from some company, the U.S. side, took a cannon flying in the wrong place, and the artillery went through the back door.
Oh. Okay.
And it was sitting out there in the jungle.
But your own pretty particular group had sort of not taken losses.
We were pretty. We did a pickup of had a firefight at night on another base. I want to say Rockason. They had a firefight all night long, and people were throwing hand grenades back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a co-pilot that day, and the pilot chose to hover up the hill because it was in the clouds.
Mm-hmm.
But there were people on there that were seriously wounded. So we hovered up the hill within 20 or 30 yards of the hill the whole way. If anybody would have been down there, they could have taken us down in a heartbeat.
Because a helicopter like that doesn't have any kind of armor or protection, does
No.
it? All right.
No.
Would you have did they give you some kind of body armor or anything like that if you wanted to use
The seats had little windows of body armor,
Mm-hmm.
but that was it. We were not
Yeah.
protected.
Yeah, and you really couldn't have a whole lot of weight added on anyway.
No.
Not for a helicopter.
No.
Yeah, so you're
The helicopter's vulnerable. Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, the small arms fire, it'd have to be hit in the right spot. I mean, much of the body is just fiberglass, but you'd have to know what you're shooting at.
Right.
Probably.
Okay. Now, as we move on in the year 1970, around the 1st of July, now the Ripcord Fire Base on one hilltop is starting to get bombarded on a regular basis with enemy mortar fire, and sometimes rockets and anti-aircraft machine guns are getting set up, and it's getting more and more difficult to go in there.
Mhm.
So was it sort of different flying into Ripcord at that point than it normally was for you?
Well, normally the helipad, there was actually two helipads.
Mm-hmm.
One helipad, but when we carried in ammo, we usually dumped it at the ammo dump,
Mhm.
which was on the south side of the hill. We never landed.
Mhm.
That was the helipad on the west side. But there was times that they were taking enough fire that we were directed around to the back side.
Mhm.
So that little, there wasn't a pad there, but that's where we dropped ammunition, not cannons. Because we weren't visible to anybody from the south or the southwest side. We dropped it where the smoke was.
Okay.
We didn't have an option. When we're coming in, when we tell them we're coming in, they pop smoke, and that's where we dropped it. No matter, we didn't have an option. We didn't know what was going on.
All right. Now, I had heard that some of the time you'd actually drop ammunition close to the actual artillery positions themselves. I mean, do they have sort of
That may be. That may be.
Okay. All right.
But I have dropped ammo on the northeast side, but they have to hump it up
Yeah.
over the top, and that's what I assume happened
Right.
at our event.
Yeah. Because some of the artillerists talk about having to carry the ammunition and so forth to where they in their positions and so
Yes.
forth. And of course, there was a 155 battery there as well as a 105 battery, and they're in different places and positions too. Okay. But I guess for you, as sort of the days go by in July, I mean, were you noticing that the fire was getting worse, or was it always just the same to you?
No, you could tell it was usually getting worse when they dropped smoke at an unusual place. There was never a community. You communicated with somebody, but it was usually just we'll pop smoke.
Yeah.
It wasn't they tell you that anything bad's happening. Of course, we can't see. We don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
So
So
when you're dropping it on the wrong side, you know, got a pretty good idea that there's something happening.
okay. Now we're getting to the point where 18th of July, then things get a little more dramatic. So what happens that day?
Well, that's the day that we were bringing in ammunition, and we just called, and somebody popped smoke at the regular place on the south side, and we just flew in there, and that's when things got bad.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, we're hovering, and this happened in not minutes, but probably seconds. We're hovering over the load, trying to lower it. I'm talking to my crew chief about, he's telling me left, right, and then all of a sudden, somebody comes, I'm flying, somebody comes up through the cab. My co-pilot was a maintenance captain. He was not an experienced, he wasn't a traditional combat pilot.
Right.
Somebody comes up through between the seat, the pilot and the co-pilot, and is hollering smoke or hollering something. You can't hear. You're right underneath the transmission. So I turn around and I look back, and when I look forward, it's completely smoked. I had no idea what was going on. So I didn't lower the collective. It was just happened instantly. I couldn't move my thought process at the time was, I think I would rather take it off over the hill and take my chances in the trees. But by that time, we apparently lost power, and the rotors hit the side of the hill, and then we were done.
Okay. And so how'd you get out of there?
My co-pilot, we were laying on our right side. My co-pilot couldn't get out of his seat because he didn't release his seatbelt. So I released his seatbelt. I popped my door when we were going down. I can remember the little lever up there. You just pull that lever and the door pops out. And he must have popped his door too, because when we were on our side, when we released his seatbelt, and I released mine, I released his, we both went out the door and on the dirt.
Okay. Was the helicopter on its side,
It's on its right side.
but was there space underneath the helicopter?
Yeah, there was space underneath the helicopter,
Okay.
because we got out and crawled out,
Okay.
out and up on the hill. The aircraft wasn't moving by then.
Yeah.
I mean, the rotors had just, the cyclic had beaten my legs black and blue. We got up on the hill and I started taking inventory of people. And there was somebody missing. There were apparently two people missing, but one guy was trapped underneath the fuel cell. Our crew chief jumped out, and the helicopter, the right front fuel cell, was on top of him. So me and some other individual, I hope to find out who that is, went back underneath. I remember taking my pistol off because I didn't want to get hung up. Went back underneath the aircraft, and he was awake or conscious, but he was pinned. We couldn't get him out. I took his helmet off and talking to him and tell him everything's going to be fine. And I noticed that the dirt was splattering around us. And my thought was, well, it was that M60 on there that was either firing, the ammunition was firing, or something was happening, and I told whoever was with us, we got to get out of here. So we crawled out, and before we got onto the top of the hill, I heard Michael scream. The fuel had poured over the top of him. So at that point, well, I remember asking somebody on the hill, do you have a cat or something we can push that aircraft up or lift it up to get him out from underneath it? And there was nothing there. And it all happened so fast that couldn't have done anything anyway.
Right.
So we were, once we got up on top of the hill, we were escorted down into some Connex containers buried. And I spent some time in the Connex containers listening to the fireworks.
Yeah, because now things were starting. You had brought in, were you on top of the ammunition you had just landed at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that all starts to go, and the ammunition of the 105 positions blows.
Yeah.
And so you have a whole chain reaction of
Yeah,
explosions.
to get underneath the aircraft, we were crawling between ammunition crates and whatever they were, because the aircraft wasn't flat, it was laying on top of stuff, so we were kind of worked our way around. It wasn't a maze, but
Yeah. All right, and then that goes, okay. And that's sort of the beginning of the end, ultimately, for Ripcord. They will abandon it a few days later, in part because of the damage done in that explosion. So what happens to you now after this? The explosions happen and so forth. Do they get you back off the fire base that day, or do you have to stay there?
no, we were there. Again, I don't know the time frame. A couple of hours, I think.
Okay.
Because no aircraft could come in, and eventually, the things were going off, and everything was shaking and lots of noise. I don't know how many of us were in that Connex. I remember when they took us down to that Connex, that whoever was in charge of the hill was there, and
Probably Colonel Lucas at that point.
I told him, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
and I don't recall him saying anything. And so we sat in that Connex container until some Hueys came in with fire extinguishers, big airport fire extinguishers. They were bringing them in, and we got on, a couple of us at least, and I can't tell you who it was. I don't remember who it was. At that point, we were probably not thinking real straight.
Happy
And
to be out
they
of there.
flew us from there on a Huey into, I don't remember, we went back to our base, I guess.
And then do they just put you back flying another Chinook at that point?
Essentially.
Okay. And then,
I think that I probably had a couple of days off.
well, were you involved when they do the final evacuation off of Ripcord? Or without, probably not using a lot of Chinooks for that at that point, but did you fly in that or not?
No,
Okay.
that was the last time I was in Ripcord.
Okay. Now, after that, how much more time do you have in Vietnam?
Well, I probably, again, this goes back, I spent a full year there, so
Okay.
it depends on
Yeah.
the exact date that I got there, so I'm assuming it's into January.
Okay, early 71.
And
Okay.
so we still flew plenty of missions. I think I did take a R&R after that.
Okay. And where'd you go?
Went to Japan.
Okay. And what was that like?
I've seen enough of it.
Another Asian country at that point?
No, that never bothered me.
Okay.
It just that it wasn't home. You don't know anybody. No Americans. We just even though we stayed on a naval base, I believe. Me and one other guy from the company went, and just not much to do, or nobody to talk to, or.
Okay. All right. Now, so what was daily life for you like in Vietnam?
Every evening you'd spend officers club, you know, I don't think we got drunk too much, but we had plenty to drink.
Mhm.
We had good meals. Once in a while, we'd have the officers club would do their own meal. We had an NCO club that once in a while you were in charge of the liquor
Mhm.
count, make sure how much liquor was there and the inventory and
Okay. Would you ever go off base, or did you just?
yeah, we went off base a couple of times, but not very often. You know, there really wasn't too much to do off base.
Mhm.
We had Bob Hope show, but we were flying people in and out, so we
Mhm.
didn't get to see those kind of things.
Okay. Now, did you have Vietnamese working on the base?
Yes,
Okay. What kinds of things did they do?
we had a barber. We had gals that would clean the lavatories. We had some bar girls. I guess that's
Yeah.
about it.
Okay. Did you have much of an impression of them, or one way or another?
Well, I noticed that the French influence, they're very pretty people.
Mhm.
Dark complexion, but I never had any problem with them.
Okay. But you really didn't have a whole much of didn't get a
No.
chance to get to know them at all, or anything like
No.
that. Okay. And did you deal much at all with the South Vietnamese military?
Only from the air.
Okay.
You know, once in a while, you had to transported troops
Mhm.
around once in a while. So you had to be, we had stories where when they were, if you transported them, somebody would leave a hand grenade with the pin pulled setting on the floor. So they get off as soon as you move.
Mhm.
Whether that was true or not, but it certainly left an impression
Mhm.
that I don't know what we could do about it.
Okay. All right.
There's a lot of things like that you just can't do anything about, but other than cross your fingers.
Mhm. Okay. Now, after Ripcord, so in the latter part of 1970, then, did things quiet down at all, or were you just still staying busy flying all the time?
We were busy flying all the time. We not only resupplied, we flew. I've taken big aircraft hangar doors, move them from one base to another, or you would fly the bus run, which you'd pick up people at point A, fly to Da Nang, or we had cases where we transported aircraft clear to Saigon, you know, or we'd trade things. We had, I remember the Big Red 1 moved, and we were moving furniture stuff. So in my aircraft, we had a whole bunch of leather lounge chairs that we were moving someplace. Well, we just happened to stop by our base and lost 2 or 3 of those chairs when we landed, and the rest of them made their journey to wherever they were going. Now there was a lot of that kind of messing around.
Now, if you flew down to Saigon or to Da Nang or a place like that, would you ever stay over there, or would you just fly back again?
Da Nang was common to fly down and back. That
Yeah.
wasn't very far.
Mhm.
But when we took an aircraft down to Saigon, I think we spent a night down there. That was a 2-day affair.
Okay. But when you do that, do you still just stay on the base, or do you go to town, or?
No, we never went to town.
Okay. All right. Did you have any feel while you were there of sort of how the larger war was going? Were we winning, losing, treading water, or just didn't think about it?
Didn't think about it. We didn't have any radios. We didn't get newspapers. We just had I had no contact with the outside world. We just, the only contact was, Bob, here's your aircraft. Take this, go from point A to point B.
Well, would you get letters from home, things like that?
Yeah, we would get letter, we'd get mail, and you could get mail and send mail. But those letters, you know, they weren't
That was family stuff.
daily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
No phone conversations.
Now, as you started to get short, did your attitude change, or did your missions change, or did you just do the same thing till you left?
I think I did pretty much the same thing. Probably up to maybe the last week, I probably didn't volunteer. Didn't. Well, they weren't volunteers. You were assigned for this flight. You didn't really have much choice of which ones you were doing.
Okay. So now, when you get to the end of your year, are you going to be able to get out of the Army at that point, or are they going to make you go to another base in the States for a while, or what will happen?
Well, when I came back, I had, I think I must have had 30 days to report to Fort Rucker.
Mm-hmm.
And flew home. I flew into Seattle. My wife met me there.
Mm-hmm.
And we stayed in Oregon for 30 days, and then drove to Fort Rucker with all of our belongings, but what we could get in the Volkswagen.
All right. And then how long did you stay at Fort Rucker?
Well, I stayed at Fort Rucker till we were discharged.
Mm-hmm.
We got an early discharge. They barely. I was a flight instructor, Chinook flight instructor, for a while, and then I transferred over to Cairns Army Air Base as a test pilot. So
Okay.
we were testing engines and other things for the Chinook, which was very enjoyable, but it was lots of boredom and moments of stark terror.
Okay. So you're trying something new and are not sure what's going to happen next, or?
Well, we were testing engines, primarily engines. So you would do all of the test the limits of the performance of the engine, run it at the highest RPM and the most power for the longest time, and just steadily do that. We flew from Cairns Army Air Base, which is essentially just south of Fort Rucker, and we'd fly down and we'd fly over the islands Apalachicola, around and around and around and around and around and around, and then we'd come back.
All right. Now, at this point, was the Army making any effort to encourage you to stay, or were they downsizing and happy to send you away?
They were, at some point along the way, I had actually started the paperwork to go to the Patuxent Naval Air Base as the astronaut program. It wasn't. It was the beginning of the people going into the astronaut program, I guess. But before that paperwork all got through, I was offered a way out.
Okay.
I had a pretty good idea that I was going to end up back in Vietnam fairly quickly, so I chose to get out.
Yeah. Okay. So now, at that point, once you go out of the Army, what do you do next?
When I got out of the Army, we came back to Oregon, and I started looking for a job. And where I was looking was in the Boise area, and I started talking to some helicopter companies, and what they wanted me to do was crop dust at night. So I decided there wasn't much of a future there, so I ended up no longer flying. I had a fixed wing license, so I still did some private pilots flying, but not to any extent, and so I ended up actually working at a lumber mill.
All right. And did you kind of make a career in that business, or did you move on?
No, I've moved around. We've owned a couple businesses since then in Eastern Oregon, and we moved to Central Oregon and back to Eastern Oregon, and then back to Portland, and had a number of professions.
Okay. And when you look back at the time you spent in the service, both in Vietnam and outside of it, are there other impressions or things that kind of stand out in your memory that you haven't brought into the story yet?
No, I have questions about why we were given smoke on the fire base where it was when they, my understanding is that they knew there was a problem. And talking to one of the crew members, he saw the people that were firing at us, but he was new on the base and didn't know whether he was supposed to fire or not. Probably didn't even know what he was looking at until it was too late.
So you still kind of wonder why exactly it was that you were sent in there to record that day under those conditions.
Well, I want to know why we weren't sent around to the back side.
Might have been a little bit safer.
And the event would have never happened. Now, whether the things would have turned out better for the people on the base, I can't answer that. We lost some lives that day. Whether that's was a trade-off, don't know.
But that memory is just going to stay with you.
Absolutely.
All
I
right.
think about that often.
Okay. Well, you actually helped contribute an important part here to the larger story, so I just want to thank you for taking the time to tell a story today.
You're welcome.